This story takes place in 2020. That's when the body of 22-year-old Marilyn Levesque was found with multiple stab wounds. Her death sparked a major public outcry, and many people demanded answers from Canadian authorities about how something like this could happen. Marilyn was born in 1997 to Karine Levesque and François Goulet, who separated shortly after she was born. The people who knew her always described her as kind, outgoing, and genuinely friendly. She was originally from Chicoutimi and spent part of her childhood with her mother and part of it in foster care. Chicoutimi is one of the 3 municipalities in the Saguenay metropolitan area in Quebec. When Marilyn turned 17, she left her hometown for Quebec City. She eventually returned after breaking up with a boyfriend, and from then on she traveled back and forth between the 2 cities, usually 2 or 3 times a week for work. Since she didn't have a driver's license yet, she relied on buses or carpool rides. By early 2020, Marilyn was living with her new boyfriend, Gabriel Truchon, in the Chicoutimi district, about 130 miles from Quebec City. According to Gabriel, Marilyn was focused on building a stable life for herself and was seriously considering going into architecture. But everything changed on January 22, 2020. It was a Wednesday, and Marilyn was in Quebec City for work. Gabriel stayed behind in Chicoutimi. Around 9 p.m., he started to worry because he couldn't reach her. After trying multiple times to call and text her, he started messaging her coworkers to see if anyone had heard from her. Then Gabriel got a call from an unfamiliar number. When he picked up, the person on the other end identified himself as a police officer and told him that Marilyn had been found dead. Later, forensic experts confirmed she had been stabbed more than 50 times. To understand what led to this moment, we have to go back 17 years. In 2003, Chantal Deschênes, a 32-year-old bartender at a Quebec hotel, met Eustachio Galais, a 36-year-old man who also worked there and oversaw guest meals. Not long after they met, the two started a passionate relationship. At the time, Chantal was the mother of 2 girls, ages 10 and 6, and she had been separated from their father for several years. As for Eustachio, he had been married to Joanne Lafrance since 1996, and together they had 3 children. Their relationship wasn't very stable. There were times when, during arguments, Eustachio got so angry that he punched holes in the walls of their home. And once, while they were traveling through Ottawa, he attacked Joanne. He was arrested and spent 7 days in jail for that incident. Still, despite everything, the outbursts, the verbal abuse, Joanne later said she never felt afraid of him. She described him as a good father, even though he wasn't always around because of the long hours required by his job. When he started a relationship with Chantal Deschênes, everything changed. Eustachio left Joanne and their 3 children and moved in with Chantal. Things between them moved quickly, and not long after they got married. At first, life together seemed smooth. Eustachio got along with Chantal's 2 daughters, and the family spent weekends at the movies, the ice rink, and other places around town. But just as fast as things had come together, the relationship started to fall apart. Around that time, Eustachio was also working more than 60 hours a week. He told his supervisors he planned to quit on December 31st, 2004, because he couldn't handle the pressure anymore. But he never mentioned the issues happening at home. The relationship between Eustachio Galais and Chantal Deschênes had become complicated and tense. Some people said he was extremely jealous. Others said the possessiveness went both ways, and that the couple argued often. Friends mentioned that Eustachio would sometimes raise his voice, but they hadn't seen him physically assault Chantal, though they did say she would sometimes insult him or even slap him during arguments. All of that tension finally boiled over on October 21st, 2004. That morning, Eustachio and Chantal got home after working a night shift at the hotel. Chantal's 2 daughters were still asleep. They had spent the night with their babysitter, Joni Hayon, who slept over whenever Chantal worked nights. From the conversation that morning, Joni, the babysitter, realized that Eustachio and Chantal had argued during the night. She left the house around 7:15 a.m., and the girls were expected to leave for school around 8. Before heading out, the girls went to say goodbye to their mother. Chantal was in the bedroom with Eustachio. That moment was the last time they ever saw her alive. At 1:29 p.m., Eustachio showed up at the home of his ex-wife, Joanne Lafrance. He had gone there to drop off all of his cash savings. While he was there, he called the police and confessed to killing Chantal. 10 minutes later, at 1:39 p.m., officers arrived at Joanne's home. Eustacio repeated his confession and surrendered without any resistance. He also insisted that officers get to the school immediately, before Chantal's daughters returned home and walked in on their mother's body. Around the same time, officers entered Chantal Deschaines' home. They found her body on the bed in her room, covered in blood. Next to her were 2 blood-stained knives and a hammer with a broken handle. The autopsy showed she had been killed by multiple blows from the hammer and several stab wounds. The impact from the hammer was so forceful that the handle snapped in half. In 2006, a jury found Eustacio Galiz guilty of second-degree murder. He admitted that he killed Chantal because she told him she wanted to leave him. He was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole for 15 years. Looking at his history, it wasn't the first time he had been violent. In 1997, he spent 7 days in jail for assaulting his first wife, Joanne. And in 2004, he murdered his second wife, Chantal. It was clear he had a pattern of abusing women. Yet in March 2019, after serving his minimum time, the parole board decided that his risk of reoffending was low enough to release him. As part of the parole plan, Galiz was allowed to have certain types of supervised contact with women, but no romantic relationships. His parole officer created a strategy outlining exactly what kind of contact was permitted. One part of the plan allowed him to visit an erotic massage parlor once a month to meet his sexual needs, but he was not allowed to date. He also had to follow a strict curfew from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. unless he was attending an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. But his self-control was almost non-existent. Instead of going to the massage parlor once a month, he was showing up several times a week. Remember, he'd been released in March 2019. By June of that same year, during one of his visits to an erotic massage parlor, 51-year-old Galiz met 22-year-old Marilyn Levesque, who worked there. Most of Marilyn's family knew she earned her living through intimate work, but she rarely talked about it, and when she did, she usually mentioned it jokingly or brushed it off. People close to her described her as sensitive, and over time, she became more guarded about the details of her job. Her relatives believed part of her wanted to leave that line of work, but it was hard to walk away from the income, especially when she could make in 2 hours what a minimum wage job might pay in 2 weeks. How she ended up in sex work isn't entirely clear, but we do know she had a difficult childhood and spent years moving between foster homes. Marilyn's boyfriend and close friends knew exactly where she worked and what she did. According to one friend, she wasn't proud of the job, but she wasn't ashamed either. She talked about it honestly. Her boyfriend didn't object to it, mostly because she worked in Quebec City, around 100 miles away from where they lived. Galiz, who by then had almost no real supervision, began visiting the massage parlor constantly. Even though he convinced the parole board that he was a changed man, his behavior showed otherwise. Several times he became violent with female employees, and eventually he was banned from the establishment. None of the workers knew he was a convicted murderer or that he had spent years in prison for killing his wife. By late summer 2019, after it came out that he had assaulted multiple women at the massage parlor, the parole board prohibited him from going to any erotic massage businesses at all. Violating that rule could send him back to jail. But by then, Galiz had become attached to Marilyn and didn't want to stop seeing her. So he found a workaround. He offered her $1,300 Canadian to meet him at a hotel instead, and she agreed. It was their first time meeting outside the massage parlor, and nothing unusual happened. Galiz felt such a strong attachment to Marilyn that he started sharing personal feelings and emotions with her. He told Marilyn that he missed his wife deeply and had spent 15 years grieving her. What he didn't say was that he was the one who had taken her life. Not long after that, Eustacio Galiz started to convince himself that Marilyn was pulling away from him. He felt their connection fading, and that triggered his anxiety and jealousy. He became fixated on the idea that she was rejecting him. He arranged another hotel meeting for January 22, 2020. Marilyn told her boyfriend she didn't like meeting clients in hotels. She preferred working in massage parlors, where security staff were present and could step in if anything went wrong. But this time, Galiz offered her $2,000, and the amount was high enough that she agreed to meet him at the hotel again. Around 5 p.m., Galiz and Marilyn were seen together at the hotel restaurant in southwestern Quebec. After dinner, around 8:30 p.m., they went up to their room. At 11:35 p.m., Galisi walked into a police station and, just like he had done back in 2004, confessed to murder. Officers raced to the hotel, hoping she might still be alive. But by the time they arrived, Marilyn had already died. The autopsy later showed 57 stab wounds. Investigators learned that Galisi had spent about 2 hours in a bar after the killing before turning himself in, and during that time, he disposed of the knife and Marilyn's phone. The crime itself was horrific, but what shocked the public even more was who the killer was. A man already convicted of murdering a woman, now released on parole and able to take another life. People demanded answers. Canada's Public Safety Minister, Bill Blair, expressed condolences to Marilyn's family and said her death could have been prevented. Quebec's Justice Minister, Sonia Lebel, also questioned how someone with Galisi's history was ever granted parole. She raised concerns about whether the officers supervising him had the proper training to assess risk and called on Bill Blair to investigate. Another commission was created to review the parole board's actions. That investigation found several failures in how the board handled Galisi's case, including gaps in case management and in how closely he was supervised. The head of the Correctional Service of Canada called Marilyn's death a terrible tragedy, one that should never have happened. He promised that both the Correctional Service and the Parole Board would take meaningful steps to prevent something like this in the future. But despite all the public statements, nothing major happened to the people involved. No one was seriously disciplined. A few Parole Board members were moved to different positions, and some were sent for additional training. And while that may look like action on paper, it didn't change the fact that a young woman lost her life. There's no way to bring Marilyn back. The hope is that her death forces the people who make high-stakes decisions to think more carefully about the consequences. Her family reached a settlement with the government, which included compensation for her death. The agreement prevented a lawsuit from being filed, and the exact amount paid out was kept confidential. There were also people who unfairly criticized Marilyn because of the work she did, but that had nothing to do with the system's failures or the danger Galisi posed. Initially, Galisi was charged with second-degree murder, but once investigators learned he had bought the knife ahead of time and planned the attack, the charge was upgraded to first-degree murder. Galisi eventually pled guilty and admitted that the killing was premeditated. At his trial in February 2020, prosecutors told the court that Galisi had developed feelings for Marilyn and became jealous when he realized she saw their meetings strictly as work. That jealousy was determined to be the main motive. On February 27, 2020, 51-year-old Eustacio Galese was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. This time he won't be allowed to apply for parole after 15 years like before. He'll have to wait 25 years. Will Galisi be released again when he's 76? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story powerful or eye-opening, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We share new true crime stories every night, shining a light on the truth behind the headlines. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and stay vigilant.